Okay, let's dive into something really interesting you sent over in your source material.
Mm-hmm.
It introduces an idea called Walson's law. Now, that might be a new term for you listening, but the core concept, well, you've definitely seen it in action.
That's right. Yeah, this isn't, physics or economics or anything like that.
Yeah.
It's more a powerful lens on, well, on human behavior, specifically how we process information and maybe the surprising ways we make decisions sometimes.
Exactly. So, our mission in this deep dive is to really unpack this observation about human psychology.
Mm.
We want to get to the heart of why sometimes facts seem to lose the battle against feelings.
Yeah.
Your source gives us the foundational definition right away. People would rather believe a lie they want to be true than a truth they wish were false.
That single sentence is incredibly revealing, isn't it?
It really is.
It highlights just how much humans are driven by emotions, by desires, sometimes even more than by objective facts.
Yeah,
And this concept, it helps explain so many things we see every day, the rapid spread of misinformation, for instance.
Uh-huh.
Or why people hold on to completely, discredited ideas. And that fundamental puzzle of why factual evidence can sometimes feel less important than how something feels to us.
yeah, it really challenges that whole idea that we're purely rational creatures,
Hmm.
you know, dispassionately weighing up data points.
Right. Like little computers.
Exactly. Instead, it suggests we're deeply emotional thinkers. The material you provided indicates we might actually distort or even reject facts if they don't align with something personal, our values maybe,
Our fears, our hopes.
or even just our sense of who we are, our identity.
And it frames this tendency not necessarily as a failing, or a lack of intelligence,
Oh,
but as a kind of built-in bias,
right.
something within our psychology.
Okay, so let's try to make this super clear. A couple of scenarios straight from the source might help.
Good idea.
Imagine, for a moment, your absolute favorite celebrity, someone you really admire, is accused of doing something genuinely unethical.
Okay.
The material says even if the evidence is clear, like undeniable,
Yeah.
you might find yourself denying it,
Mm-hmm.
or maybe trying to make excuses or justify their actions somehow.
And the core reason for that, according to this perspective, is simply because you want to believe in their goodness.
Right. You want them to be good.
Accepting that truth, well, it's painful. It directly contradicts that strong desire you have, that internal conflict where the desire wins over the facts. That's a perfect example of Walson's law.
Right. Makes sense. Now, think about the opposite. What if it's someone you really dislike? Maybe a professional rival or someone you just don't click with.
Uh-huh.
If you hear something negative about them, true or not, you might very easily believe it.
Oh, yeah, because it perfectly fits what you already want to believe of that person.
Right.
Exactly.
Your desire for them to be flawed or maybe unpleasant, it makes you highly receptive to that negative information, often without really scrutinizing its factual basis too closely.
And again, this isn't about being gullible or uneducated. The source really emphasizes that. This preference for the desired belief. It's presented as a fundamental aspect of our wiring. It even suggests it might have evolved somehow, perhaps as a way to protect our emotional well-being.
Or maybe our social standing, our place in the group. It's fascinating. It's less about, can you understand the facts?
Right.
And more about, do you want to accept them?
Which leads us straight to the next question.
Yeah.
Why? Why exactly are we wired this way?
Well, the source material delves into the psychological principles that seem to underpin Walson's law. It gives us some hooks to hang this on.
Okay, here's where we get into the engine room, so to speak. The material outlines 4 key principles at play. First, there's confirmation bias.
Ah, yes, a classic.
This is that well-known tendency we have to seek out and readily accept information that confirms what we already believe is true.
And just as importantly, to ignore or discount or even actively avoid information that challenges those existing beliefs.
Yeah,
Our brains often seem, well, more comfortable reinforcing our current views than actually questioning them. It takes less energy.
Then there's cognitive dissonance. This is that uncomfortable psychological tension, that feeling you get when new facts clash with your established beliefs.
Right, that internal inconsistency.
And the material suggests Walson's law really illustrates how, when faced with this discomfort, many people instinctively choose to reject the facts.
It's often just emotionally easier, isn't it, to discard the challenging information rather than tolerate that uncomfortable feeling of holding contradictory ideas. Or worse, having to change your mind.
Exactly. It's that internal discomfort that drives the rejection of the truth.
Right. Following that, we have emotional reasoning. This principle highlights how powerfully our emotions can override pure logic.
Oh, so.
Well, if something feels true to us, if it aligns with our emotional state or our desires, we might accept it as fact, even without solid evidence, as your source points out.
So our feelings become the primary validator.
In many cases, yes. Gut feeling overrules the spreadsheet, you might say.
And finally, identity protection. This sounds like a big one.
It really is. Our beliefs, especially those tied to core aspects of ourselves, like our political views, maybe our religious beliefs,
Yeah.
they aren't just intellectual concepts floating around. They're deeply integrated into our identity, into who we feel we are.
So accepting an uncomfortable truth can feel like, what, a personal attack?
Exactly. It can feel like a direct threat to who we are, to our community, or our sense of self, according to this perspective. If a factual challenge feels like an attack on your identity or your group, then believing the comforting lie becomes, in a way, a form of self-defense, defending your identity.
Wow. Okay. So how does this actually play out in the real world? Your source provides some really impactful examples showing how this tendency where desire or emotional need outweighs factual evidence shapes some major issues.
It really does. One significant illustration that the source brings up is the phenomenon of climate change denial.
Right.
Despite, the overwhelming scientific evidence indicating a changing climate, denial persists for many people.
And the material explains the Walson's law angle here. For some, accepting the reality of climate change could mean, well, acknowledging some responsibility, maybe.
Or facing uncomfortable lifestyle changes. Thinking about consumption, travel, diet, things we like.
Right. For others, it might conflict with their political identity or their social group's view.
Exactly. So the desire to avoid that guilt or the discomfort or maybe that group conflict, it leads many to prefer comforting, even if inaccurate, narratives.
Yeah.
Ideas like climate change is a hoax or, oh, scientists are just exaggerating. They're simply easier to accept because they align with what people want to believe about their own responsibility or the need for change or just their identity group being correct.
That makes sense, unfortunately. Another powerful example from the source involves anti-vaccine movements.
Yeah, that's a potent one.
I mean, think about it. Vaccines have dramatically reduced deadly diseases, saved millions globally, yet skepticism and outright rejection continue to spread.
And the material explains this within the framework of the law. Some individuals, it suggests, want to believe that vaccines cause harm. They might cling to debunked theories like a link to autism.
Despite the science.
Despite the overwhelming science. Others might have a deep-seated distrust of public health institutions, maybe big pharma. And accepting vaccines requires trusting those entities they inherently distrust.
And importantly, the material points out that many prefer the idea that, say, natural immunity is always superior.
Right. That fits a worldview they want to hold, and that strong emotional preference for a particular narrative, regardless of the evidence, really fuels the flow of misinformation in that area.
The source also looks at cults and conspiracies, mentioning examples like QAnon or flat Earth beliefs.
Where followers often subscribe to really complex narratives about secret manipulators or hidden truths.
Even with zero credible evidence.
Right. But why? The perspective from the source is that they want these things to be true.
Why would they want that?
Well, believing in a secret truth or being part of a group that's in the know, it can provide a powerful sense of purpose, community, maybe even feeling special or superior.
Ah, okay.
And that intense desire often just overpowers any willingness to look at or accept facts that contradict their chosen reality.
Financial scams, Ponzi schemes. They also tragically illustrate this, according to the source. The Bernie Madoff case is mentioned as a classic example. Investors ignored significant red flags about his operation for years.
Yeah, huge red flags.
And the heartbreaking reason given is often quite simple. They were making money.
They desperately wanted it to be true. They wanted that investment to be legitimate and successful. Victims, even really smart ones, can cling to hope, ignoring mounting evidence of deception.
Because the truth is just too painful.
Exactly, because the painful truth that they were being defrauded, maybe losing everything, was simply too devastating to accept emotionally.
Wow. And this same dynamic, where emotional pain overrides accepting facts, it's often seen in personal relationships too, right? Particularly around infidelity.
Oh, definitely. People might stay in clearly toxic or unfaithful relationships despite really obvious signs.
The source attributes this, at least in part, to the immense emotional pain associated with betrayal.
Yeah. That potential pain is so overwhelming that the mind just latches onto a false reality, a comforting lie they desperately want to believe. Like,
Oh, it would never actually do that to me.
precisely, even when the evidence stacks up.
So we see how Walson's law operates on that really deep personal level, driven by individual desires, fears, identities.
Mm-hmm.
But your source also zooms out, doesn't it?
Yeah.
To show the broader societal impact.
Oh, it has massive implications there, too. In politics, for example, the material describes how loyalty often seems to trump objective truth.
How so?
Well, driven by identity, maybe confirmation bias, voters might overlook significant issues with their own side, while eagerly accepting and spreading negative, often false information about the opposition.
And that's a key reason why misinformation and, well, fake news spread so rapidly, isn't it?
Absolutely. People are much more likely to share things that confirm their existing biases or what they want to be true about the other side, often regardless of accuracy.
Media consumption,
Yeah.
especially with social media, seems heavily influenced too.
Oh, for sure. Algorithms are basically designed, your source explains, to exploit Walson's law
Ow.
by feeding users content that aligns with their existing beliefs and preferences, confirming what they already want to see and hear.
Which creates those powerful echo chambers.
Exactly, where contradictory information just gets filtered out. And that leads, as the source suggests, to increased polarization, a fracturing of any kind of shared reality.
Even the justice system isn't entirely immune. The material notes that factors like eyewitness testimony, juror decisions, they can sometimes be influenced by emotion or pre-existing biases, not solely by objective facts.
Yeah, highlighting how that desire or belief can potentially sway outcomes, occasionally leading to tragic errors like wrongful convictions based on flimsy but emotionally compelling evidence.
And a very recent stark example provided is from public health, specifically the COVID-19 pandemic.
Right. Your source discusses how some individuals refuse to accept the reality or the severity of the virus.
Choosing comforting conspiracy theories or denials.
Yeah, over the challenging scientific information. And the material reports how that preference for a desired reality, wanting the pandemic to be, I don't know, a hoax or just not a big deal.
It had consequences.
It absolutely contributed to delays in safety measures and, tragically, had significant consequences, including loss of life.
Okay, so after exploring all these examples, it sounds pretty bleak. Is this just an inherent flaw in human nature that we're stuck with? Is it impossible to overcome?
Well, the source material does shift tone here. It suggests that while Walson's law is a powerful tendency, it's not necessarily an absolute unbeatable rule.
That's encouraging. So what does the material offer? How might we push back against this tendency?
One crucial tool mentioned is education and critical thinking.
Makes sense.
Learning how to question information sources, how to evaluate evidence rigorously, and maybe most importantly, how to recognize our own emotional biases when we encounter information that's presented as a key defense.
Media literacy is another vital skill, according to the source.
Definitely. Understanding how media, especially online platforms, can sometimes be designed to manipulate information or play on our emotions, that's essential to navigate the information landscape and resist falsehoods.
And this next one feels incredibly important on a personal level. Cultivating personal humility.
Explain that.
Your source suggests that simply acknowledging the possibility that we ourselves might be wrong, that our deeply held beliefs could be challenged by facts. That's a powerful act in itself.
How so?
This humility, it creates mental space. Space to consider and potentially accept facts, even if they are uncomfortable or challenge something we really, really wanted to be true.
That's interesting. So being willing to be wrong is key.
Seems like it.
Finally, the material emphasizes the approach of dialogue over debate.
What's the distinction there?
Well, when trying to discuss sensitive topics where Walson's law is likely at play, people are apparently far more likely to reconsider their position, or at least be open to new information,
Okay.
through respectful, empathetic conversations, rather than through aggressive arguments or mockery or shaming.
Which just makes people dig in harder.
Exactly. They just dig in harder to protect their beliefs and their identity. Dialogue opens doors. Debate often slams them shut.
Okay, so thinking about all this,
Yeah.
what's the core takeaway here? What should we really hold on to from this deep dive?
Well, Walson's law, as explored through the material you shared, offers a pretty sobering insight into human nature, I think. Truth doesn't always automatically win.
Yeah.
Our deep-seated psychological needs, our desires, They mean people are often drawn more strongly to comfort and emotional alignment than to, objective clarity and data.
Yeah, that phrase again. People would rather believe a lie they want to be true than a truth they wish were false. It sticks with you.
It does, but the material doesn't just leave it there on a down note. It suggests that understanding this law isn't just some academic exercise.
Right.
It's presented as a crucial first step toward navigating its influence, both in the world around us and, maybe more importantly, within ourselves.
How so?
By learning to recognize in yourself and in others when a belief might be held simply because you want it to be true, rather than because the evidence actually demands it. Well, you gain a certain power.
A power to choose differently.
Maybe. Or at least to understand what's driving the belief. As the source puts it, this understanding is framed not just as interesting psychology, but as a fundamental survival skill in our current environment.
A survival skill.
Yeah. In an age saturated with misinformation and, let's face it, emotional manipulation. Something to definitely keep in mind as you encounter information every single day.